Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. It's just after 10:30 p.m. in New Delhi, 6 in the evening in London and 1 in the afternoon in Washington, D.C. And you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. With me is my colleague Mark Lynn.
Namaskar. Well, we'll get you all the latest on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Ghana. And Prime Minister Modi is on a 9-day tour of the Global South. He will also travel to Trinidad and Tobago, to Argentina, Brazil and Namibia.
Indeed. It is the longest foreign tour by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in over a decade. So you can expect India to champion the cause and voice of the Global South in each of those 5 countries.
Yes, indeed. And we'll take you live to Ghana, the capital, Accra, where my colleague Tapas Bhattacharya is standing by. We'll also be joined by guests who will put the visit into the proper context for you. Let's get started, I guess.
Indeed. So, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has reached Ghana on the first leg of his 5-nation tour. In a special gesture, the President of Ghana, John Mahama, received the Prime Minister at the airport, where he was also given a traditional welcome.
Prime Minister was also given a guard of honor along with a 21-gun salute. This is the first visit by any Indian Prime Minister in the last 30 years to Ghana.
The President of Ghana, John Mahama, welcomed the Prime Minister on his first ever bilateral visit to the nation.
Prime Minister, in a post on X, said that he was honored by the special gesture of President John Dramani Mahama for welcoming him at the airport. Prime Minister said that both nations look forward to working together to strengthen the long-standing relationship and to explore fresh avenues for collaboration.
As Prime Minister Modi reached his hotel in Accra, thousands gathered to catch a glimpse of him. A community of 15,000 in Ghana, the Indian Diaspora, gave a grand welcome to the Prime Minister.
And the Prime Minister also posted on X about the warmth that he received from the Indian Diaspora upon his arrival in Accra in Ghana. He added that the spirit of togetherness and the deep cultural linkages are truly wonderful.
And we now bring you a special report on the significance of PM Modi's visit to Ghana and what it means for India-Ghana relations. My colleague Tapas Bhattacharya sent us this special report.
India and Ghana share warm, time-tested ties built on common democratic values and a shared vision for development. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Ghana from July 2nd to 3rd is not just symbolic, it's a strategic move to reinforce South-South cooperation. This is the first high-level visit by an Indian Prime Minister in 30 years, signaling a renewed focus on Africa.
There will be delegation-level talks during which the bilateral relations will be reviewed and also discuss various ways to strengthen and deepen bilateral relations. Honorable Prime Minister will have a one-on-one meeting with his counterpart. Then there will be a banquet dinner in honor of Honorable Prime Minister. The next day, Prime Minister will be addressing the Parliament, and he also will be interacting with the Indian community there, which is about 15,000 in number.
Trade and investment and development cooperation are the key pillars of India-Ghana relations. Leaders from both nations are expected to explore new areas for collaboration with a strong focus on economic growth and inclusive partnership. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also address Ghana's parliament in this trip.
During the visit, there will be few focus items, will be agriculture, where the Ghanaian leader, the president, is keen to engage with India. He is also keen on the vaccine development, creating a vaccine hub in Ghana, for not just Ghana, but also the West Africa context. Defense cooperation will become an important item on the agenda, and the critical minerals and the digital public infrastructure.
Prime Minister Modi's visit aims to elevate bilateral cooperation across strategic sectors and reaffirm India's commitment to the global south. The visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi aims to deepen ties across key sectors including economy, energy, defense and development cooperation, marking a significant diplomatic push in Ghana and a common vision for both India and Ghana for the global south. With camera person Rakesh, this is Taposh Bhattacharya for DD India from Accra, Ghana.
And joining us are two guests, Ambassador Ruchi Ghanshyam and Professor Swasti Rao.
Ambassador Ghanshyam is a former Indian High Commissioner to Ghana, South Africa and the United Kingdom. And Professor Rao teaches at the Jindal School of International Affairs.
Indeed. Let me start with you, Ambassador Ghanshyam. We heard the Secretary Dhammu Ravi talking about West Africa. Why is West Africa so important for India?
Well, West Africa is extremely important because, to start with, traditionally India's relationship has been mainly with countries in Eastern Africa because that was our near abroad, just across the Indian Ocean. West Africa, though there is a lot of goodwill for India in West Africa, our effort at outreach and reaching out to the countries in the West African region have not been that active in the past. It's also important because these are mainly the main petroleum producing, oil producing, gas producing countries, the cocoa, timber, gold. Of course, gold is there in South Africa as well. But West Africa is an extremely naturally blessed region of Africa. Agriculture offers a great deal of scope. So and traditionally the leadership of India and West African countries, especially Ghana and Nigeria as well, have been very warm and very close. So West Africa is, from that perspective, an extremely important area of outreach for India.
Before I bring in Professor Rao, if I may quickly ask you, Ambassador Ghanshyam, since you have served in Accra, Ghana, any recollections or memories of the time you spent there? Your impressions about the city and country?
Yes, I have plenty of memories. I remember Ghana very, very warmly, as it may surprise people that it is one of my favorite postings. And that was, I think, apart from everything else, it was because of the warmth that the people of Ghana have for India and for Indians. There's enormous goodwill everywhere. India is very highly regarded. During our time, the Jubilee House, which is where the president's office and residence are located, that project was completed, and it was done with a line of credit from India. So that even added to the warmth and closeness between our two countries. So I have extremely cordial and warm memories of Ghana.
Professor Rao, how does India's association with Africa differ from let's say China's association with Africa?
Oh, well, good evening to all of you. And it is interesting that we are discussing Africa today. With respect to India and China, yes, that's the real comparison to make. Of course, I usually focus more on the strategic aspect. I mean, you pick up anything. China is not only one of the biggest source of foreign direct investments, and in all of Africa. In fact, if you look at the data, you will see that about 52 African countries, if I'm not wrong, but definitely more than 50 African countries have signed, agreements with China under the BRI initiative, as well as the African Union itself. And I think if you look at data particularly, this has only been growing, and this is not just to do with BRI and not just to do with the developmental projects, but incidentally about Ghana. I was just taking some data before, of course, I was preparing for the show, and I just wanted to brush up some details. And incidentally, you'd be surprised that China is also the largest defense supplier to Ghana. So with respect to many things, if you were to compare, I think China's presence in Africa is definitely very heavy. On the eastern side, yes, I completely agree with Ma'am, Ambassador Ghanshyam, when she was mentioning how we've been engaged more with the eastern side for a variety of reasons. I mean, if I have the time to elaborate, I'll elaborate, because so many choke points go from that region and all that. But on the western side, we don't really have not engaged enough. And the other thing that makes it imperative for us to engage these two countries, particularly, as Prime Minister's tour is on 2 African countries on the western side, and then he goes to Latin America. So unlike many countries in the African continent that are really marred in civil war and a lot of ethnic conflicts, etc., relatively speaking, you would see that both Ghana and Namibia are relatively stable countries. They have immense, I would say, critical and rare, minerals. Our engagement with Ghana has been, pretty historic. There is a line of credit, and there's a whole host of things that we do with them. There's a whole host of developmental projects that we do in Ghana, and that is why we enjoy such immense reputational advantage as well. But when you compare that, with what China has been doing there in a very sustained manner for many decades, you will see that, of course, it's high time that we step up our engagement. Compared to Ghana, Namibia, of course, we have not really had any major investment. For Ghana, of course, we are also one of the top, 10 investors. But in terms of Namibia, we will not see that, there is not so much robust Indian presence in that region. And I think this is time to do that, because particularly when we're looking at these two countries, we're looking at the critical and rare earth. And our presence in these countries is also important, because let me just remind everybody that since the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb and those choke points remain so disturbed because of what is happening in the West Asian region, I'm sure everybody knows about the Iran-Israel conflict and the ever-simmering West Asia. Please remember that almost all of our exports going to Europe are actually going via the Cape of Good Hope. And when you take that route, you will see that it's going along the coast of these nations. So our presence in that region only makes sense. This is the right time. And I just told you that it is high time we catch up, because 52 African countries are already having these BRI projects. It's a different thing whether the BRI projects are working or not. But like I said, that if you put together the fact that China is also the topmost defense partner, of course, the things become more strategic than what meets the eye. So I would applaud the Prime Minister for doing, something which we should many years ago, but I think this is the right time, because the world is looking at a diversification in supply chains and production chains of critical and rare earth, and this is the right time. Back to you.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, it is the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Ghana in 30 years. in terms of the optics and likely outcomes from that visit, would you say that trade and investment would figure high on both countries' agenda also? Do you see the scope for a more robust defense and security cooperation between India and Ghana going forward?
To start with, this is the first in 30 years, but really the second visit of a prime minister in ever since India became independent and ever since Ghana became independent. So it is a landmark visit. The visit of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao was on his way to, when he was going to Burkina Faso 30 years ago. And this is the start of the Prime Minister's visit this time. As you know, as is quite evident that this is a landmark visit. From Ghana's side, there have been many visits. I mean, the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, visited India in '61. President John Kufuor visited India. So did President Rawlings. Even President Akufo-Addo, the immediate predecessor of President Mahama, visited India, I think, on 2 occasions at least. President Mahama himself has been to India. He came for the India-Africa Forum Summit. And earlier, as Vice President, he had come for the CII India-Africa meet, which they have annually. So the Ghanaian leadership is very well familiar with India. Indian visits have also been there, but more at other levels. The ministerial level visits have been there, the official level visits have been there. But at the level of the Prime Minister, this is only the second visit to Ghana. And the President of India, then President of India, Pranab Mukherjee, visited in 2016. So from that perspective, if one were to see, this visit actually somewhat brings it to the right level, because the visits from India have not been that frequent. So it is an important visit from that perspective. Ghana is, you could say, it's like a beacon of democracy in Africa. It was, to my understanding, the first country in Africa where democratic power changed through elections from one political party to another. And since the last constitution of Ghana came into force, it has been happening regularly, peacefully, and in a very notable manner. Trade and investment, there is plenty of scope. India is the largest destination for Ghanaian exports, but majority of that is, I think, about 70% is basically gold, because we are importing a lot of gold from Ghana. It is time that we start looking at how to diversify, even if it means bringing some Indian input into that. Now, defense and security, yes, indeed, Ghana is a small country, but it is strategically located, and due to many factors, it's a very vital country. So, sorry. From these perspectives, this visit is very important.
Well, Professor Rao, India's approach is more of a development partnership with Africa, as well as, a capacity building kind of approach. So, how would you view this in terms of the overall goodwill that India, takes with it to countries with this kind of philosophy?
Well, I mean, this is bang on correct, because there is a reason why India enjoys the reputational advantage and the reputational factor out there in those countries. And it's not very long ago that Ghana, key destinations of the Indian pharmaceutical exports anyway, and also about the Indian-made COVID vaccine. And if I'm not wrong, I think 6. So these are things, this is one part. The other part is, like I always keep saying, that India perhaps is the only country in the world whose rise has not been destabilizing. And therefore, India offers, a very egalitarian kind of a developmental partnership approach that a country like China doesn't do, even though China's loans and China's, grants, etc., China's economic statecraft comes very well, I would say, huddled under no strings attached kind of a garb. But in reality, China certainly uses its economic statecraft to its own designs to sort of dominate the global south, etc. So that's one part. That's the China part. But even if we want to look at beyond China, I think there's just so much that we can talk about. I just mentioned, Ghana being, receiving India's pharmaceuticals. Similarly, India has been buying so much gold from Ghana. And that has been continuing because if you could look at the gold relationship, the gold exports per se, you would see that if you take that out of the equation, you will see that particularly, the trade has been in Ghana's trade surplus, and there is a lot of potential there to actually explore by way of trying to make the trade a little bit more egalitarian and more, equal. Because, like I said, that it is the strategic location of that country is such an that it is time for India to sort of step up that thing. And this is one thing that I'd like to mention that has not been mentioned and discussed so far, is that particularly for African countries, a couple of things. One is that if you remember, it was during India's presidency, the G20 presidency, that the entire African Union actually was welcomed in the G20 fold, and that happened when India was the president, and that was pretty much a kind of a historic moment in terms of South-South cooperation. And the second thing is that I think India should be looking at also exploring the triangular cooperation developmental model when it comes to countries like Ghana or say Namibia. And we're just referring to these countries because Prime Minister is going there. It doesn't mean that the other countries are not so important, but since we're focusing on these two, the reason being that especially if you want to look at critical rare earth, those kind of things, the production of the rare earths and the refining of those rare earth and then the supply lines of those rare earth, actually it is extremely expensive and really dominated by certain key industries. So it only makes sense for India to try and explore the triangular cooperation mechanism. For many countries in Africa, we already do that with France, we do that with Germany. We have also signed up now triangular cooperation with UAE in a different country, in Sri Lanka, and that's a different theater. But coming back to the theater that we are discussing, I think these are the ways in which we can really try and step up our engagement, which can be fostered and which can be facilitated by the sheer reputational advantage that a country like India has, in those regions. And like I said, that India's presence in those regions actually goes beyond merely trade or merely critical rare earth, because, like I say, that right now most of our trade is actually passing through those routes, and it is only sensible for us to step up presence in that region as well.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, you referred to Ghana's democratic credentials, how it has regularly held democratic elections that led to a peaceful transfer of power. Unlike some of its neighbors, including, for instance, Burkina Faso, Niger or Mali, which have seen military coups. I'll pause here. We're getting some visuals from Accra. Prime Minister Modi continuing with his engagements as part of his the first leg of his 5-nation tour to the global south. He is holding a number of bilateral engagements. On day one of his visit to Ghana, he reached Accra a short while ago. Since then, we've seen President Mahama himself receive the Prime Minister at the airport, followed by a ceremonial welcome and a guard of honor, followed by a 21-gun salute. The two leaders also held informal talks at the Kotoko airport, and now we are seeing the Prime Minister continuing with his bilateral engagements as part of his visit to Ghana. Right, if you're just tuning in, we're getting you the latest visuals again from Accra, where the Prime Minister is holding bilateral meetings before he sits down with President Mahama for delegation-level talks, followed by the signing of MOUs and a joint press statement by the two principals, President Mahama of Ghana and Prime Minister Modi of India. Remember, Prime Minister Modi is on as I mentioned before, a 5-nation tour of the global south that has first taken him to Ghana. He will next travel to Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and then onwards to Argentina and Brazil in South America. And he will cap his foreign tour by traveling to Namibia before returning home on the 9th of this month. It is the longest visit by Prime Minister Modi in over a decade.
Indeed. In fact, the delegation level talks will start soon. The Prime Minister will be introduced to the delegation from Ghana. We'll give you those updates as and when we get them. And there's a lot expected in terms of, in those talks. There are going to be MOUs that are likely to be signed. One is on vaccine hub, agriculture, digital infrastructure, traditional medicine. These are some of the areas that reports say will be focused on. Let's turn once again to our guests. And Professor Rao, the Prime Minister is also going to be conferred with the highest civilian honor, the Companion of the Order of the Star of Ghana. How do you view this in terms of, diplomatic symbolism, as well as we were talking a little earlier about goodwill, about India's goodwill?
Quite frankly, it is difficult to actually remember that Prime Minister recently went to a country that has not visited in a long time and wasn't really given a state honor. So I think Prime Minister Modi is pretty used to, getting these state honors, and this also speaks volumes of just how valuable they view India as a partner and also India's leadership. It's like both things go hand in hand. So I think it speaks for itself. Talking about it from those countries' perspective, whether you look at Latin America or you look at Africa and all these different, whether Western Africa or Eastern Africa, and particularly Western Africa, since we are discussing it right now, it also shows that they really sort of value, India's place in their diversification. So this just, to my mind, this is the best that I can think of, that this is actually an iteration of just how welcome, India is in those regions. And one of the key reasons for that is that India is the only country in the world, that's becoming a global power whose rise has not been destabilizing. So in my opinion, that kind of bears testimony to that fact. And Prime Minister Modi and his style of sort of engaging, this and his commitment of being the voice of the global South, taking leadership of the global South, always standing up, no matter which platform India is at, whether India is invited at G7, whether it was the G20, of course, the entire African Union became a member of G20 under India's presidency. So regardless of which platform it is, you would always see that India and Indian leadership has always stood up in terms of its commitment to being the leader and the partner of the global South. So I guess this is just a testimony to that.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, if I can go back to the question I meant to ask you about your description of Ghana as an oasis of democracy in a volatile region and how it contrasts with some of its neighbors, including, for instance, Burkina Faso, Mali or Niger that have seen military coups. What do you make of Ghana's democratic credentials, and why is that so important from an Indian perspective?
Well, to start with, I would just like to touch upon a little bit on the significance of this award. I think Ghana is really trying to put its the warmest welcome possible for Prime Minister Modi. The fact that the President himself came to the airport to receive the Prime Minister, and then they confer the highest civilian award. Prime Minister addresses the Parliament. I think these are ways in which you can gauge the importance that the host country is attaching to the visit. And in this case, one can see that all stops have been pulled to make sure that the welcome given to our Prime Minister is the warmest that they could extend. Now, coming to Ghana's credentials as a democratic country, it's very important because Ghana is one of the maybe rare countries in Africa, I'm sure there are others as well, where there has never been a civil war. It's a very peace-loving country. It has a history of military coups. There was a long period when it had multiple coups, and then there was a long period of military rule. But then, a new constitution of Ghana was formed, and a two-term limit for the president, 2 terms of 4 years each. That was introduced. And ever since elections were held following the adoption of that constitution. All presidents have retired once their two 4-year terms are over. Now, this is India being a democracy herself and a leading democratic nation of the world. I think this is a very important, there is a very important symbolism attached to the common democratic credentials and the common worldview of our two countries.
Professor Rao, you were referring to the scope for a more robust defense cooperation between India and Ghana. In that context, do you think India would see value in supporting Ghana's security framework, especially through training, equipment, supply, defense exchange, given the situation it finds itself in the Sahel region? Also, Ghana is part of what is known as the Accra Initiative, a multilateral effort aimed at addressing terrorism and transnational crime in Western Africa.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So there are two things that we can focus on when it comes to our defense, so-called cooperation or engagement with a country like Ghana. One, of course, I agree, is the counter-terrorism capabilities, which is already a part of our deliverables. So I think India brings a lot of not only a lot of political so to say currency in trying to rally countries of the world in making them understand that India's fight against terrorism is not India's fight alone, but it is frankly it is everybody's fight, because terrorism is a global problem. So that's one part. Of course, India could do that. But on matters which are more hardcore defense, I see two things. First is that India can really help build more maritime capabilities, because if you look at the last 1 decade, especially when India's maritime strategy and maritime vision started to take better shape after 2015, when the Sagar initiative was launched, and eventually then you have the IPOI and so on and so forth. And so many different, I would say, dots were connected by way of IORA, etc. So, several of these dots started to get connected. I think in all, if you look at what has happened in the last 10 years, India has really developed, and especially here, one key factor is the IFC-IOR, which is in Gurugram, which is the Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean region. And that is also one of the reasons why traditionally we have focused more on the eastern side, the eastern coast of Africa, because it really is a part of the Indian Ocean. It's one end of the Indian Ocean region. India has been part of various other initiatives, multilateral initiatives like the Operation Atalanta from the EU, or, for example, the UN-led initiatives to fight piracy in the Gulf of, in the Horn of Africa, etc. So India has been present there. But you don't really see that kind of a thing replicating in the other side. And what I mean to say is that while piracy per se is not a problem anymore, but in that process, the kind of capabilities that India has developed by way of better models of information fusion, better maritime domain awareness, better enabling frameworks to get into these agreements with a variety and a host of countries. Okay, I think that is something that can certainly be replicated to a country like Ghana and Namibia, because that is somewhere I think we can really build capacity. So when it comes to capacity building, I mean, we obviously cannot be giving. I mean, I would have come to that, the third one, but right now, we don't really see any major ambitious plans of giving them multiple rocket launchers like China is giving, or, for example, the armored vehicles, etc. But I'll come to that later. I think the first focus there should be, after counterterrorism, the capacity building in maritime domain awareness and information fusion. And I think that those countries would really welcome, considering the IFC-IOR has been such a resounding success. And now the third thing, which is now to do with defense, which is that, what has happened is that particularly going by the Indian success in, especially bigger Indian platforms, advanced Indian platforms in Armenia, I think the case for indigenously made Indian defense equipment, which is very good, which has also been now battle tested, many of that, especially Akash systems, etc. Many of our indigenously developed drones that have been battle tested now in Operation Sindoor, and that come at a very competitive price. So for countries that are looking to modernize and also to keep their defense capabilities, those supply chains diversified and those sources diversified, I think India right now gives a very, very good opportunity, not only to just sell them, but also to enter into joint ventures and get an FDI. Because please remember that when India is looking at selling more weapons, the idea is not just to sell, but the idea is to also co-build. So from the sellers or a buyer's mindset to a co-builder's mindset is what we are trying to transition as. And these countries, because like I said, that it was just in December 2023, then, Ghana has been receiving, advanced multiple rocket launchers from China. Then they have like armored vehicles from China. They have patrol vessels. Of course, we can give them patrol vessels too. No, I mean, India's corvette capabilities have really advanced. Indian Navy has done a tremendous job when it comes to that. So, many of these kind of things, I think if we were to put our act together and try to really map our requirements, we could find a lot of these areas where we can really get into, classic defense cooperation and perhaps also some joint ventures. But even if that looks a little ahead in time, I think building their maritime domain awareness capabilities, building their, for example, better capabilities to monitor their critical infrastructure, undersea infrastructure. I mean, those kind of things actually has a lot of potential to also join hands with like-minded countries, take a more collaborative approach. Actually, sky's the limit. And I'm sure that when we will see the joint statement coming out after the two leaders meet and finalize one, we would see a lot of, advancement in that region as well. Because please remember that India now is looking at Africa as a major defense partner too. And a lot of work has happened in the last few years that was never really the case earlier. So kudos to the MOD also for that, to actually sort of, take focus to a region where we never really, partnered beyond the political things of the South-South cooperation and the climate issues and the human rights issues and there being democracies, etc. So I think a lot of water has flown under the bridge, and we are really looking at a very, I would say, advanced kind of a cooperation. And if the right enabling frameworks can be put in place now, we would see a lot of improvements and developments in the coming years.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, how much of South-South cooperation is business-to-business cooperation between private sector companies? We see that, there are lots of Indian companies in Ghana, and in Africa in general. There's the Tata Group, there's Ashok Leyland, there's Mahindra & Mahindra, Bajaj Auto, NIIT, Bharti Airtel, L&T, Shapurji, Palonji, and there are some also some pharmaceutical companies. So, what's the scope like?
There's a lot of scope because Indian companies are already there and they have been doing business. Many of them, of course, are successful, and that's why they have stayed. Shapurji Palonji came to Ghana for the construction of the presidential complex, which is now Ghana's seat of government. So since then, they have acquired other businesses. And then the other thing which is very important is that Ghana, being a very peaceful country, where living conditions are very conducive, schooling is available, health facilities are also decent. So it's a place from where people can do business in the rest of West Africa. So at one point of time, I remember Ghana used to call itself Gateway to West Africa. So Ghana does offer a lot of opportunities for Indian businesses. It's resource rich, it's got minerals, it's got enormous potential for agriculture. Now, of course, defense and strategic areas as well are being explored more and more. Up till now, it's been more limited to training of defense personnel under the ITEC program. Though, of course, to start with, India did assist Ghana in setting up its air force. So there is a lot of scope for Indian businesses. Many of them are operating there successfully. There are many Indian-owned companies, which belong to the diaspora, and they are quite prominent as well. So even whether it's making steel from scrap, or whether it is other packaging industry, there is pharmaceuticals. There are many sectors in which Indians have set up businesses, and they are doing quite well. It's a small country, so to that extent, the scope of engagement would be limited, because It's a small country with a small population compared to India. But it does offer a lot of opportunity because it can serve as a gateway to West Africa.
Professor Rao, if you take a step back and look at India's engagement with the African continent as a whole, do you think New Delhi has acquitted itself well by, one, ramping up its ties with almost all countries on the continent, opening more diplomatic missions across the length and breadth of the continent, going in for development partnership projects, including, for instance, the tele-education and telemedicine projects. So India remains a force or a player of consequence when it comes to development partnership on the African continent, is it not?
Oh, yes, India's partnership with the African continent. I mean, this has evolved much beyond. I'm not a specialist on Africa, and I basically look at how the strategic ties are developing, and it is from that lens that I look at Africa. So, I mean, what I see when I examine these ties, they have evolved much beyond historical ties, and now the kind of relationship that you have has a very clear strategic flavor. It is very multidimensional. It encompasses, trade, investment, development cooperation, and different models of development cooperation. And also, if you look at the numbers, right? I mean, particularly, so India is also aiming to achieve a very ambitious 200 billion trade target by 2030, and this is of course for the entirety of the African continent. But we are looking at deepening collaboration when it comes to manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare, of course, renewable energy, security assistance, like I said. And similarly, Africa is also moving beyond its traditional, the aid recipient status that it has usually had. And India must develop actually, and it is, I think, Prime Minister's visit to Ghana and Namibia, etc. It also kind of connects those dots, and these are subsets of India's long-term strategy of how to really enhance our investment, how to sort of enhance like a trade which is more equal, for example, we were just mentioning the case with Ghana, etc. And like I said, that also capitalize on the reputational advantage that we have with those countries, and look at the newer, fields that are emerging. By the way, I was just interested, I just found something interesting that while Ghana has signed up for China's 5G, but many of the service providers are actually Indians. So you also see that this is also coming as a way that sort of tells us that these countries are also very keen on diversification. So these countries, if we are able to pitch it correctly, if we are able to pitch the right money, and that's why I said that the line of credit is of course one way of looking at it, but we must look at more triangular cooperation. We must look at, what are the other, for example, G7 initiatives in the region. I mean, I know there are G7-led initiatives in both Africa and Latin America. In fact, one of the corridors that we keep comparing the IMEC corridor with, when IMEC was not really so much in trouble when a crisis in West Asia started. But there is a Lobito corridor. So what I'm trying to say is that India must try and capitalize with its good relations, its solid relations with many of its strategic partners, and sort of, engaging them in a way which leads to a win-win, for everybody. So bilaterally, of course, from India, of course, but just the line of credit per se is not going to be enough, is what I'm trying to say. Because if we are trying out there to really project ourselves as this developmental partner, as a country that is serious about its leadership and being voice of the global south, etc., it is really difficult to sort of compete or outcompete China that comes with deep pockets. And I also gave you in my initial remarks a lot of data to show that there is no doubt about the fact that the entire continent is completely dominated by China. Of course, you will see in pockets that in Central Africa you have a presence of the Wagner group, this private army from Russia. In other regions, you will have some other, actors. You know that France and Italy are trying very hard to retain their relevance in Africa. So all that is happening. So you will see all shades of all that. But particularly talking about the Western side, I think we must try to sort of leverage our good relations and reputational advantage with as many actors as possible, because India believes in a collaborative framework. And unless and until we do that, it is difficult for us to sort of generate billions and billions of dollars of, investment and billions of dollars worth of developmental projects, and we will not be able to do that. And so that's what I'm saying. But by and large, if we look at what has happened between India and Africa, it is nothing short of spectacular. In fact, one of the things that I keep noticing and feeling again and again is that I think it's high time we should also really be having more strategic experts that actually specialize on Africa. We have some excellent, experts, of course, the serving ambassadors and those that have served there, of course, are a very important part of that league. But in terms of academic research, in terms of strategic research, we still do not see that the Indian students and the Indian researchers are really focusing on the region. Whereas this is a continent which is full of potential, and this is a continent which is full of so much. So I think ever since the India-African Forum Summit, when it was first held in 2008, and when we sort of started institutionalizing this high-level political dialogue, and we started expanding partnerships in trade, security, development, etc. Now, after that, to the time that the entire African Union came into G20 under India, I think a lot of water has flown. So, like I said, that by and large, if you ask me, what really should be looking at, apart from trade and the collaborative framework of triangular cooperation mechanism that I just mentioned, I said that there is a very important and undeniable strategic and maritime security imperative. Of course, when we talk about maritime security, the eastern coast of Africa becomes much more important for us because of the presence of the slots, the sea lanes of communication, and all the choke points, and also because India has been traditionally present there to fight piracy, etc. But if you look at the other side as well, I said that is where the growth potential really lies, and that's where India can do. So I think those are kind of things that we should be looking at, and Africa also itself has many of these very ambitious goals, and for that, it certainly does not want to fall completely into the garb of or the fold of China. It is looking very much at keeping with development partners diversified, and India certainly is a very, very great choice for that.
Okay, do stay with us, Professor Rao and Ambassador Ghanshyam. We'll play out a story sent by our correspondent who is in Accra. India, in fact, opened its representative office in Accra in 1953. This was prior to Ghana's independence, and it established full-fledged diplomatic relations with Ghana in 1957, immediately after Ghana got its independence from Britain. But, India is among the top trading partners of Ghana. That's what Tapas Bhattacharya dives into in this report.
India and Ghana share a vibrant and growing partnership rooted in development, cooperation and mutual progress. Through concessional lines of credit and grants, India has extended support worth nearly $450 million to Ghana for key infrastructure and capacity building projects. Among the notable contribution, India provided a $1 million grant to upgrade the Kofi Annan ICT Center in 2016 and another $1 million to rehabilitate the Jubilee House Presidential Complex in 2017. Capacity building remains a strong pillar of bilateral ties. Under various scholarship schemes, hundreds of Ghanaians have benefited from world-class education and training opportunities in India. As part of the Pan-African E-Vidya Bharati and E-Arogya Bharati initiative, India set up a state-of-the-art learning center at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, providing high-quality tele-education and telemedicine services. Ghana was the first country to roll out the project in 2020, and over 1,600 scholarships have since been awarded. India stood by Ghana during the pandemic too, supplying over 1.6 million vaccines more through the COVAX initiative. On the trade front, India is among Ghana's top partners and the largest buyer of its gold. Ghana's export to India also includes cocoa, cashew nuts and timber. Indian companies have invested in 820 projects worth $1.92 billion since 1994, making India one of the top investors in Ghana. From infrastructure to education, from pharmaceuticals to agribusiness, India's footprint in Ghana reflects a true spirit of South-South cooperation. India and Ghana, partners in progress, building shared future. With camera-person Rakesh and More Mukut, along with my engineer Saurav, this is Tapas Bhattacharya reporting for DD India from Ghana.
A quick word as well about Ghana. The country is situated on the coast of the Gulf of Guinea in Western Africa. Although relatively small in area and population, Ghana is one of the leading countries of Africa, partly because of its considerable natural wealth and partly because it was the first black African country south of the Sahara to achieve independence from colonial rule. Modern-day Ghana, which gained its independence on 6th March 1957, consists primarily of the former Gold Coast.
Ghana, the first sub-Saharan African nation to gain independence, has long been a beacon of stability and progress in West Africa. Formerly known as the Gold Coast, it broke free from British colonial rule in 1957, inspiring liberation movement across Africa. Now, when we look at Ghana, with gold, cocoa and now oil driving its economy, Ghana has actually transformed into one of the region's most dynamic nations. The country takes its name from the ancient Ghana Empire, a medieval trading powerhouse once upon a time. Its modern history is rich and complex, from the rise of the mighty Ashanti Kingdom in the 1700s to the British colonization and multiple Anglo-Ashanti wars. Independence came in 1957, led by Kwame Nkrumah, who helped found the non-alignment movement as well. Though Ghana faced political turbulence in the following decades, democratic stability returned in 1992 with the new constitution and multi-party election. Today, Ghana stands tall, a democratic nation with a booming youth population, thriving cultural heritage, and growing global presence. The capital is Accra. The population is 32.1 million, and the languages, well, apart from English, there are 11 more local languages that's there. Ghana's journey is one of resilience, pride, and promise. With camera person Rakesh and more Mukesh Sharma, along with my engineer Saurav, this is Taposh Bhattacharya for DD India from Ghana.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, what can you tell us about the Indian diaspora in Ghana? We've seen Prime Minister interact with the diaspora every time he travels abroad, including, as we saw a couple of hours ago, in Accra. How big or small is the Indian community, and what can you tell us about their contribution to the politics and life in Ghana?
Well, Ghana has a reasonably large-sized diaspora. So I have served in South Africa and in UK, where of course the diaspora was much larger. In Ghana, it's about 15,000. To start with, they came, to work for British companies, because we were both, India and Ghana were both British colonies. So there were British companies in India which were also present in Ghana, and that's how the Indian diaspora started coming. Now, I think the diaspora should be about 90, should have completed 90 years. When I was posted in Ghana, they had celebrated the 75th anniversary of the diaspora coming to Ghana. Now, 15,000 is not a very large number, but for a small country like Ghana, it's a reasonably large number. But important thing is that out of this 15,000, there are many who are very successful. They have invested in businesses, and
Ambassador Ghanshyam, I'll stop you there because we are showing you some visuals now of the delegation level talks that are taking place. As we can see, the Foreign Secretary is there, as well as on the Indian side, the Secretary of Economic Relations. And on the Ghanan side, we can see, apart from the President Mahama, there is also, of course, the Foreign Minister is sitting next to him, Samuel Ablakwa. And there are some other ministers. There is the Minister for Communication and Digital Technology and Innovations also, Samuel George. So we can see that these are areas of cooperation that are most likely to come out of this discussion. This is the Foreign Minister also visible.
And as we see on these visuals, Ambassador Ghanshyam, if you could do finish making a point about the diaspora and the Diaspora Connect.
Yes, the thing which I found very interesting about the diaspora is that the diaspora has its own temple, and all the gods are present there. And the ground floor of the temple had a very large hall, which was really the place where the community would gather, whether it was to welcome the new High Commissioner, whether it was to have meetings of the Indian Association, or whether it was to have Garba nights during Navratri. And all the festivals are celebrated with gusto. The Indian Women's Association does a Diwali Mela. They also celebrate Holi very, enthusiastically. And they do a lot of charitable work as well. During my time, I remember the Indian Women's Association, from the funds they had raised through these Diwali Mela and other activities, they had renovated a primary school, which was then, inaugurated by the First Lady. And she had come and gone around the school with us. So the diaspora is very active. But the other interesting part is that there are two other temples which are set up by Ghanaian Hindus. One is a Hindu monastery, and that was set up by Swami Gananand, who is no more. And the other is the Hare Krishna temple, where, the statue of Krishna and all the Krishna Janmashtami and the festivals are celebrated.
Indeed. Let's bring in Professor Rao as well. Professor Rao, President Mahama is in his second term, and he's come to office after, he had lost the elections twice before this, and he's come back to power after almost 10 years. And he's come with a vision, in fact, and part of that vision is to build a 24-hour digital economy, to oversee, to basically advance green energy and sustainability. To what extent do you think India is, going to participate or partner in these ventures?
This is just coming almost at the same time when India is deepening its relationship with Africa at large. And I think since we are mentioning, here we already discussed India and Ghana relations. Of course, we've also discussed India and the larger African continent relations. I think it's also useful to discuss that Ghana is also the gateway to the ECOWAS, which is which is a major economic community of West African states. And I think it was earlier this year when I think the Indian high official from India actually visited there. And those kind of things are important. If you look at the range of issues which were discussed, from economic trade and cooperation, capacity building, investment, I think all of those things are pretty much aligning with what Mahama is having in his mind, is having in his agenda, and what India is having in its agenda. So I think, in my opinion, I've always tried to present these convergences as either concentric circles or connecting of dots, because nothing is coming, nothing here that is happening, or no development here that is happening is mutually exclusive. All of this actually connects to the bigger picture, which is that we have to ensure from their side, they have to ensure that their development partners, trade partners, defense partners remain diversified. There is way too much risk of overtly relying on one big or two big partners, and that has been a lesson that we have learned not only from COVID, but also a consistent lesson that we've been learning from all these unending wars that are marring the world. So from their perspective, the diversification is important. Africa, like I said, it is transitioning. I wouldn't say it is completely transitioned, because not all the African countries have the same profile. So of course, there's a bit of profiling issue also out there, but it's been trying very hard to transition from an aid recipient country to a country that can play a more important role, capitalize on the various the resources, the vast resources that it has. And also from India's perspective, we are mentioning Ghana, etc. Just look at how important the region it is for us. Africa produces about 8% of global crude oil and 6% of global natural gas production. You know, about 15% of India's total oil imports are sourced from Africa, from different countries, in the region, etc. Africa accounts for 30% of global reserves of critical minerals. Okay, and here we are looking at particularly cobalt, etc., and also uranium, because Prime Minister will now from here go to Namibia. Namibia is very, very rich in uranium, which is very important for our civil nuclear development, particularly now that we have really changed the legal hurdles that were really stopping a lot of foreign investment from coming and development from coming to our civil nuclear development. So long and short is that in their perspective, it makes a lot of sense for them to make sure that they are not overtly reliant. They already are. I mean, for the scramble of Africa, we all know that how China has made these inroads. I already gave you figures of how China, 52 countries have signed up for BRI projects. China is one of the topmost defense suppliers to so many countries, especially in that part, etc. But despite that, I think this makes sense from their perspective. And from our perspective, it makes sense because, frankly, India's rise, when we talk about India's rise in the world and India as a whole, it cannot really be done unless India's trading relationships become more diversified. India also focuses more on investment-led manufacturing, not just in India but also in these parts. And then India must look at, I mean, if you look at these relationships, India must look at getting more critical rare earth, etc. Diversifying those sources, becoming a player. It is all easier said than done. Nobody in their right minds can argue right now that India can become a global player right now in terms of the critical rare earth supply chains and the production chains. That scene is completely dominated by very few countries in the world, particularly China and the United States. But just as the trade between China and the United States becomes so uncertain, just as the trade wars have returned, I mean, India would need its own sustainable and, basically a sustainable access, to these things. Where, of course, like I've always mentioned, that we can't be alone, because it is the sheer cost of it is just so much. But this is the right time to actually explore it. So, looking at it from that perspective, to my mind, there is a huge degree of convergence. There will always be certain divergences, but that is the task of foreign policy. Foreign policy, a successful foreign policy strategy is always about expanding convergences and minimizing divergences. And when it comes to Africa and us, I think this has just been phenomenal. And if you allow me, I'll just mention, because last when I was discussing how the defense ties have grown, I really have to mention that the India-Africa defense dialogue, when it happened in October of 2022, and the kind of presence that we saw from Africa was extremely very, very heartening. So that's what I'm saying. That's a multi-dimensional relationship. It is a win-win kind of a situation. There is a whole host of permutation and combination that we can get into. Like I said, I already explained that the areas of these potential collaborations are growing actually. And frankly, it has to be, like I said, that basically what we really need to be looking at in the last 4 or 5 years, when we've seen the relationship grow so much, that has been happening because of frameworks which were enabled. So we have to really look right now not at results, because results will only follow. We have to get the right frameworks in place. So when we have the right frameworks in place, we have the right steering groups in place, we will see more progress happening by the end of, say, the next 5 years or something. So I'm expecting something like a broad 5-year plan or a 10-year plan in terms of seeing whether we are able to sort of get there. Because, like I said, that both sides are ambitious, but for the ambition to translate into practice and results, we really have to focus more on enabling frameworks and follow-up, because I think follow-up is where perhaps we will need to focus on. Back to you.
Ambassador Ghanshyam, taken off from the point where Professor Rao left, he referred to how both countries can be more ambitious in their engagements. In that context, when we approach or reflect on the question why Ghana matters, one can't help but also note that Ghana, for instance, is India's second largest trading partner in Western Africa after Nigeria, number one. Number two, Ghana is the 8th largest oil producer in Africa. And Ghana, as you were mentioning, is a member of the ECOWAS regional group as well. For India, stronger ties with Ghana means greater access to Western Africa. In that context, what do you make of the economic complementarity mentality that exists between the two countries? For instance, India can offer to Ghana help in agriculture, in vaccine production, or turning Ghana into a vaccine hub, digital public infrastructure, and defense and security. In turn, critical minerals, including lithium, for instance, oil and gas, can be also sourced from Ghana, is it not?
Absolutely. Ghana can be an important source of many kinds of, important vital minerals. And also Ghana can be a place where much of these, developmental activities can be undertaken. But the fact that really hampers is the way in which these things are done in India. India is not like China, where the state is like all powerful and all everything. So the state goes ahead and does the investment. The state goes ahead and creates the infrastructure. In India, it's a mix. The government, of course, opens the way, but the private sector has to go forward. Now, to help the private sector, the government of India has actually started this system of giving lines of credit and buyer's credit, so that companies that want to go ahead and do projects on their own can at least have a security of finance. With that, one hopes that the Indian private sector would be encouraged enough to, and once the terrain becomes familiar, they can actually take it forward. The very important point that needs to be emphasized, and Professor Rao had earlier mentioned it as well, is the lack of awareness of Africa in India. There is hardly any scholarship of Africa in India. There are hardly any books. People don't know. I think, though we have a very long-standing relationship with Africa, Mahatma Gandhi actually started his Satyagraha movement in South Africa. And it was from South Africa that he came and joined the freedom struggle in India. So we have a very long history of relationship with Africa. But compared to that, the scholarship, the awareness, the knowledge about Africa in India is limited. And it is therefore very important that there should be some exchange of scholars, some exchange of people interested in Africa and Indians who are interested in Africa, and vice versa, and that these exchanges take place. There should be greater effort to create awareness, generate understanding of why African continent is really important for our future. And how it is going to be when everywhere else the population is declining, it is Africa which will have the population. It is Africa where all the developmental effort has to be focused, because in the West, the infrastructure is already developed. So creating the awareness is very important if we have to really expand the presence that India has in countries in Africa. And Ghana, of course, is a prominent example of that.
Ambassador, can media play a role in bridging the gap? I mean, if you ask
Absolutely.
me, we in the Indian media, for one, can be equally guilty of ignoring or treating Africa episodically or Pavlovian in some, as some
Yes.
call it.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. The role of the media is vital. If you see, there are African dignitaries who visit India, and the coverage would be in some inside page of the newspaper, whereas something small happens I won't compare or name countries, but many other countries get much more prominent coverage in the Indian media. But that is just an example. The important thing is to focus on countries in Africa. I mean, I remember at one point of time, I had remarked this, said this in one of my exchanges in Ghana, that if there is civil war in one part of Africa, people in India would think that the whole of Africa is unsafe. Actually, Africa consists of 54 countries, diverse countries, and people in India are not aware of it. And media is really the best vehicle available for redressing this.
Professor Rao, so Africa consists of 54 countries, and you were mentioning the African Union a little earlier. Of course, India bringing the African Union into the G20. But what role, can India play in African unity if there is actually such a desire amongst the African countries to bring about more stability within the continent and freedom of movement and a common purpose?
Well, I think that's a noble question to ask, frankly. I don't know. I don't think I have an answer to that because I completely agree that on the one hand, India's approach, no? I mean, if you look at the larger Indian audience's approach to Africa, has been very stereotypical, right? So I completely agree with that. People tend to think of Rwanda, Burundi, Congo wars as being representative of the entire African region, which is definitely not the case. Or, for example, what happened in Somalia, etc. So I think that image is very, I would say, persistent and continues to be persistent, and it is a victim of stereotyping. That there's no doubt about it. Now, whether India can do something for African unity, I think India would have all diplomatic support for when it comes to anything to do with African unity. But frankly, if you look at the situation on the ground and if you sort of zoom in and deal with more granular issues, I think that the situation is very different. And therefore, I would perhaps, argue that the approach where you are dealing with regions and identifying regions is something which is perhaps more helpful. So that is why when we're looking at West Africa, I mean, West Africa has a different set of, when we look at from India's strategic objectives, right? When we're talking about, for example, the India-Africa Defense Partnership, or for example, the first ever field training exercise that we had with Africa, the Africa-India field training exercise. By the way, Ghana was a part of that as well. Now, we could have all these things. We have the defense industrial, our defense industrial outreach to Africa. I mean, we've been doing all of those things. But when it comes to, say, for example, presence, we will always see that the certain actors are going to be more visible there. There are certain actors that are going to be more proactive, and we will have to sort of develop that approach as well. I mean, I think it suffices to say, and the way India's Africa policy has been evolving, and all the wonderful developments that I've been mentioning ever since the last few years at least. Okay, you do see that while India always has a support for peace and stability in the region, but let's face it. I mean, do you genuinely think that India is a major player in what is happening in Sudan? For example, I mean, this is an endless war, frankly. Or, for example, India is not really Donald Trump, that India can just go around taking credit for any ceasefire and every ceasefire under the sun. So, I mean, we would have our own limitations when it comes to diplomatically engaging and trying to do something. Of course, we've been part of many peacekeeping missions, by the way. In fact, India's contribution to United Nations peacekeeping has been phenomenal. And this is something that, the United Nations peacekeeping initiatives have always said, but that's certain parts of it. If I'm talking about more strategic objectives, more trade objectives, obviously there will always be countries that are more interested and countries that will be less interested. Not the economic profile is not the same. It's not uniform. So obviously that kind of those kind of granular details will always be relevant.